What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides video. I'm Kangas, and today I'm running you through all the balance changes as well as the new content on patch 11.15. We'll also provide tier lists curated by our high elo analysts for all 5 roles, so hit that sub button and let's get right into it. First up, let's start off with the skins. With the Ruination and League's lore expanding, we got some Sentinels of Light joining the battle. But first of all, we have Ruined Misfortune and Unbound Thresh. Following them are Sentinel Graves, Pike, and Rengar. These skins all give a modern twist to all of these champions, and I heavily suggest you take a look if you like these champions. Now with skins covered, let's move through these system changes next. Now this patch features an upgrade to one of the newer items this season, Hullbreaker. League's premier split pushing item has been underperforming, and even though we do consider it an upgrade from Sanguine Blade, it's still on the weaker side, so it got a buff this patch. The resistances have been increased from 25 to 45 to 25 to 60. It's a pretty solid buff that will help out significantly. In the late game, that is a 15% more effective health against both physical and magic damage. So with split pushing looking strong this patch, especially since Hullbreaker has been buffed, if you need help with your macro play, we got tons of courses at ProGuides.com by players like CoreJJ and Aframu. We also got tons of coaches that you can get in direct contact with so they can coach you one-on-one, so make sure you check it out. Next up, let's talk about champion balance. We'll start with the top lane, and this patch, top lane is pretty eventful with changes. We'll start off with one of the more popular picks right now in Gwen. Although she underperformed upon release, various changes have paved the way to success for her. In high elo especially, Gwen's got a ton of presence with high pick rates as well as high ban rates. And while her win rate does fluctuate, it's certain that she's a powerful pick, especially because of how well she scales. So on this patch, her ease attack speed bonus was decreased from 40 to 80% to 20 to 80%. The loss of early game attack speed will make taking fights early on that much harder for Gwen. With such a rewarding late game though, this nerf makes it slightly riskier to pick Gwen if you're the type to play aggressively. But since you'll still end at 80% attack speed, I imagine that more passive laners probably won't even notice the difference. But at the end of the day, the ability was nerfed at its first rank, meaning that players will have to deal with the loss of bonus attack speed for at least the first 50 minutes of the game. This also might affect you taking Ignite on her in the top lane like a lot of pro players like to do. Gwen will remain an S tier pick in spite of the change for now, because we don't think it's big enough to knock her down a full tier. Now I'm sure none of you are surprised, but Aurelia has also been nerfed this patch. Last patch was crazy and she absolutely went off after some adjustments. Most notably, her W received a massive change, and it's no coincidence that it is the target of this patch too. In both high and low elo, Aurelia saw a massive spike in win rate, play rate, and ban rate. In high elo, she managed to take the spot as the second most popular top laner, which was a huge upgrade from previous patches. Last patch, Aurelia ended with a 52% overall win rate, which was a massive jump from her previous 47%. So this patch, she's been toned down. Her WAD ratio went down from 50 to 40%, physical damage reduction down from 40 to 80 to 40 to 70%, and magic damage reduction from 20 to 40% to 20 to 35. But remember that this is still an upgrade from its previous iteration. It scales up to far exceed the previous values and still includes the new magic reduction. New in quotes, I guess, since it technically used to. But anyway, we'll leave Aurelia in the OP tier for now, but we're making sure to keep an eye on her. But we doubt that this nerf will be enough to take her out. Next up, we got a slight nerf for Wukong. His HP regen per 5 was reduced from 4 to 2.5. Not a big nerf, but it definitely adds up in an extended laning phase. Most of us can probably agree that this nerf won't have a giant impact. The biggest impact it'll have is before your first base. If you're running Summon or Teleport though, I'll go as far as to say that this nerf will not impact you at all. You can just recall and teleport back, and life is still peachy. For Wukong top players that run Ignite, however, every point of health counts. Especially if you're greedy and try to stay for that last mini wave, you'll now notice some missing health when compared to before. But Wukong's placement will also remain unchanged this patch. Now moving on to the buffs, let's talk about Kennen. A bunch of top lane mains hate playing against ranged champions, and my guess is that this bully is back. His Q's damage has been increased from the original 75 to 235 plus 75% AP to 85 to 265 plus 80% AP. Don't get us wrong here, this is a giant buff, especially at level 9 where you max the ability and can take advantage of that 30 extra base damage. Just make sure that you don't miss. Although we'll leave him in the A tier, I think that there's a solid case he'll make a push to the S tier and higher elos. Next up, Mordekaiser also received a giant buff. His W's cooldown was reduced from 14 to 10 to 12 to 8. and the damage stored is up from 35 to 45%. With this extra survivability, Mordekaiser should be better equipped to take on all the new fighters that are running around the top lane at the moment. And a decreased cooldown means that he also has a little more sustain to work with as well. Mordekaiser will remain in the S tier after his buff. And last but not least is Rumble. No numbers to talk about here, but he's received some quality of life changes. First up, some bug fixes, and his passive's heat decay and overheat check should be more consistent moving forward. We'll leave his placement untouched as well. There is one top lane change that we want to mention though. Viego has been moved all the way down to the C tier. We'll cover his changes in the upcoming jungle section, but he's lost a ton of sustain and even some damage. After finding way too much success as a solo laner, Riot specifically decided to hit him with some intense nerfs this patch. So in the OP tier this patch, we have Set, Camille, and Aurelia. Following them in the S tier are Riven, Mordekaiser, Fiora, Jax, Silas, Malphite, Gwen, Wukong, Urgot, Shen, Dr. Mundo, and Tahm Kench. Oh, and if you missed our update, Tahm Kench is currently finding a ton of success in the top lane. He deals a lot of damage, and the immense sustain from his Q provides is challenging to play against. But that's it for top laners, so next up, let's run through the jungle. And just like I mentioned a couple seconds ago, Viego was nerfed. But this time, the nerfs are a little stricter. Riot tried to tone down solo lane Viego last patch, but unfortunately the changes were not enough. His ban rate has continued to climb, and he's ended up around a 38% ban rate in high elo. And this number even goes up to around 47% in elite levels of play. Now, of course, this number is a combination of jungle as well as solo lane Viego bans, but with nerfs this patch, that number is bound to go down. This patch, his Q-based damage has been reduced from 25 to 85 to 15 to 75, with his bonus damage to monsters up from 10 to 20. The big nerf, however, is that his healing for minions is going down from 50% to a straight 10%. Ultimately, Viego jungle won't really be affected too heavily. He did lose some damage to champions, but the biggest nerf is that minion sustain. Last nerf it was 100 to 50% and that hurt, but 50 to 10% is a massive drop, and there is no doubt that solo lane Viego will feel the effects this time. So we're dropping him down from the OP to the S tier. It's not a huge drop, he's still a solid pick, but he can't be flexed around nearly as much now. And next up, surprisingly, Nidalee actually got a buff this patch. Her base HP was increased from 545 to 570, and her HP per level is up from 85 to 95. While it might not seem like a big buff, it's one that high elo players will definitely be taken advantage of. Flat health is still a solid combat buff, as fights are often decided by one final auto attack. Plus, you can still take Conqueror on Nidalee, and now you have more health to work with. Although we'll leave Nidalee's placement untouched, we expect to see a small increase in her win rate in higher elos. Alright, before we finish up with junglers, it's time for our question of the day. If you could remove one mythic item from the game, would you? And if so, which one, and then why? Personally, I'd take out Everfrost because I think it's kind of stupid that an item can give you CC in a kit that otherwise wouldn't even have it, but let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. So next up, Shyvana is also up for a buff. While she's done decently in overall play, she has been heavily underperforming in high elo specifically. So this patch, her Q's cooldown has been reduced from 9 to 5 to 7 to 5 seconds, and the AP ratio increased from 25 and 15% to 35 and 25%. That is a 20% buff as well as a major cooldown reduction. With significantly increased clear speed as well as more damage, Shyvana is in a much better spot than before, and we're moving her up to the B tier. And in other news, things are actually looking pretty promising for Lilia. Her overall win rate shot up from 45% at the end of patch 11.13 to 50% by the end of last patch. A much more accessible pick than before, there's a good chance that we move her back to the S tier very soon. It appears that a lot more players are able to use her effectively after the combat buffs that she received, so we'll keep an eye on her, but she's staying where she is right now. So in the OP tier, we feature the return of Lee Sin alongside Xin Zhao. Following nerfs to other OP junglers, Lee Sin has come out on top once again at all ranks. In the S tier, we got Viego, Elise, Evelynn, Fiddlesticks, Diana, Zac, Kindred, Kayn, Kha'Zix, Nocturne, and Shaco. That's it for the jungle, so next up, let's take a look at mid. And surprise, surprise, we also got a decent number of mid changes this patch as well. For any Annie players out there, I know there's at least a dozen of you, sorry to say, she got nerfed. Her Q has received a minor nerf with the AP ratio down from 80 to 75%. Now, this nerf is not a deal breaker early on, but as the game progresses, it'll become more noticeable. Since the cooldown on the ability is so short, even a 5% reduction on the ratio can be a pretty big deal. But we're still leaving her in the S tier in spite of this minor nerf. Now, Aurelian's Soul was also nerfed this patch. A rather controversial change. The reason Riot went ahead with this change was that his win rate in elite levels of play was way too high. While he's unpopular, players at the top are finding way too much success with him, and one amateur player always plan ahead in particular. This guy's played on a lot of amateur teams and is trying to go to Academy and Pro play, and he kinda one-tricks this champion. And there's a couple other high elo players that play him too. I don't have much of an opinion on this change. His play rate's already so low, and I feel like he needs some other changes to make him more accessible as well. But anyway, his E's flight distance was reduced from 5,500 to 7,500 to a flat 5,000. This means that his ability to roam has taken a pretty big hit. But Aurelian Soul's placement also remains unchanged. Now, Kayle is also facing a nerf this patch, as she's finding success in both at the top and the mid lane. However, things are sailing too smoothly for her in the mid lane, so the safety that the lane innately provides might be a bit too much. As a result, she's consistently scaling up and carries games with ease. So Kayle's magic resist has been reduced from 30 to 26, making her more vulnerable to mid lane opponents. And as we all know, the majority of mid laners deal magic damage, so this should make it easier to bully out Kayle and either pick up solo kills or just force her out of lane altogether. Although Kayle would have made the push into the S tier, we'll adjust her to the A tier following this nerf. AP assassins especially should have no problem pressuring her on in the early game. Now, Silas has been a top tier mid laner for quite some time, and he's been nerfed as well. His Q's damage is going up from 60 to 280 plus 80% AP to 70 to 290 plus 90% AP. However, his W's healing is going down from 30 to 150 plus 45% AP to 25 to 125 plus 40% AP. In theory, this is a nerf because his Q isn't a targeted ability while his W is. The loss of guaranteed sustain for some extra damage is in Riot's eyes a nerf. Personally, I do agree, but there's no doubt that Silas will remain a powerful pick in spite of this change, so we're moving him down from the OP tier to the S tier, as this will likely force a shift in the optimal way to play him. Now moving on to buffs, let's start off with Cassiopeia. Her E's damage has gone up from 10 to 90 to 20 to 100. This is a gigantic buff at level 2 specifically, because the damage is doubled. It is a huge investment of mana to trade heavily that early on, but having the pressure to do so is a pretty significant change. Later into the game, 10 more damage is still a pretty big deal too, and I can't even count how many times she casts her E in a teamfight anyway, so the longer one goes, the more value that she gets out of this buff. We're moving her up to the A tier because of this. And next up for buffs is Syndra. Her Q's mana cost has been reduced from 60 to 80 to 40 to 80. Now, our analysts say that at the very least, it's a noticeable early game buff and players will feel less restricted with their Q usage, but they want to keep her in the C tier in spite of it. Now, I rarely disagree with our analysts, but I think she's going to be a lot better than that, but we'll keep an eye on her and then adjust her accordingly. Now in the OP tier, we have Katarina and Zed, followed up by Silas, Talon, Annie, Fizz, Kiana, Diana, Ahri, Yone, LeBlanc, Kassadin, Anivia, Vladimir, Yasuo, Malzahar, and Aurelia. And while we're still keeping an eye on her, LeBlanc could potentially push into the OP tier as well. She's been on the border, and depending on how the meta shifts this patch, there's a good chance that she makes it. So make sure to keep an eye on the channel for our mid-patch update next week. So we got a couple of changes to cover in the bot lane. First up, Caitlyn was actually buffed this patch. Now before anyone gets angry and pulls out their pitchforks, it's a mid to late game buff, not an early game one. Her Q's AD ratio was raised from 130 to 170% to 130 to 190%. And anytime Caitlyn has received an early game buff, she's taken over the bot lane meta, so I welcome a change that won't have that sort of effect. With more Q damage later into the game, it's more rewarding to pick Caitlyn than before. Sometimes you can pick up an early lead and simply get outscaled, but this buff makes it so that you can get some more value out of playing the laning phase well. So we moved her up to the A tier as a result. Xayah was also recently buffed, but it wasn't really enough. As a result, she's getting another one. Her ultimate cooldown was lowered from 160 to 130 to 140 to 100. This is a massive late game buff, as you could easily catch her without her ultimate every other fight. But after this change, Xayah will likely have her ultimate available any time that you run into her. Well, as long as she's not running headfirst into any unwarded brush. Although we moved her up to the B tier, we'll continue to monitor her performance, especially in elite levels of play, because it could go even higher. Now, other changes that we've made are that we dropped Senna and Sivir down to the B tier. Senna has been underperforming as a bot laner, but at the very least, things are faring well for her as a support. Sivir, meanwhile, is slowly falling behind her competition, as many other marksmen are receiving buffs. So our OP picks are Ezreal and Samira, followed up by Jinx, Kai'Sa, Ashe, Vayne, Jhin, Ziggs, Tristana, Draven, and Kog'Maw in the S tier. And finally, let's finish off with supports. First of all, let's talk about Thresh. The uncontested king of supports in Season 11 has received yet another nerf. He'll definitely remain popular in spite of this one, but this one's pretty big. His E's cooldown was increased from 11 to 9 seconds to 13 to 10 seconds. This significantly lowers Thresh's early kill pressure and also takes away some power in the mid to late game. So yes, we finally moved him down from the OP to the S tier. This nerf isn't a reason to stop picking him, he's still going to be pretty good in spite of it, but just know that he's weaker than before. And now my only question is, when are they going to nerf Lulu? And please let me know ahead of time so I can start playing something else and not abuse her anymore. Now, the alternative to picking Thresh is Blitzcrank, because he actually got a massive buff this patch. His armor was increased from 37 to 40, while his Q's damage went from 70 to 270 plus 100% AP to 90 to 290 plus 120% AP. I mean, come on, honestly, the armor buff would have actually been enough. Remember that Blitzcrank has his passive, so this means that he's got a ton of health to work with early on, and the value of 3 armor is more impactful on Blitzcrank than it is on other champions. On top of this, they buffed his Q's base damage as well as the AP ratio, so Aurelia will feel even better, but so will full AP Blitzcrank. And yes, I know I just said that, but I take no responsibility for the results of anybody looking to build full AP Blitzcrank in your ranked games. Regardless, Blitzcrank remains an S tier pick after the buff. And then there's Rel. Also buffed, her W's cooldown was lowered from 13 to 11 seconds. Admittedly, it's a good buff, but won't completely offset the massive nerfs that she received in her last set of changes. I think she's going to remain a B tier pick for this patch, and other more prominent picks will probably steal the spotlight. So our OP picks for this patch are Leona and Lulu, followed up by Thresh, Morgana, Nautilus, Blitzcrank, Maokai, Xayah, Senna, and Yuumi in the S tier. Oh, and by the way, if you're in low elo, you can actually throw Xerath in the mix for fun. He is absolutely popping off right now, and the lowered cost of Ludens has absolutely helped him out. And that'll conclude our 11.15 patch rundown. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. And also while you're there, check out the description for a link to join our Discord. You'll be the first to hear about our future giveaways and also just be part of our growing community. Until next time, everybody, best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one.